Welcome to Logistics Business Conversations, where we talk with key spokespeople in the logistics industry about topical issues. Hosted by Peter MacLeod, editor of Logistics Business magazine.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. My name is Peter MacLeod, and welcome to this latest edition of Logistics Business Conversations, brought to you today by international shipping compliance and localization company Passport Global. Entitled Tariffs to Triumph, a founder's take on thriving during global disruption, we're going to be chatting today about how businesses can not only steer a path through what can be best described in logistics terms as the choppy waters of trade tariffs, but can actually flourish during these challenging times by absorbing and actioning industry knowledge and intelligence. And to help us all understand how, I'm delighted to introduce you to my guest, the co-founder and CEO of Passport Global, Alex Yancher. Thanks for joining us, Alex, and welcome to Logistics Business Conversations.
Thank you, Peter. Great to be here.
So, Alex, I have to say there's not going to be a soft entry point through which we can ease our way into today's topic. So I'm going to dive in headfirst by asking you to explain to the listener in as simple terms as possible, what's the background to all of this new wave of tariffs and what do they mean to us both in business and as consumers?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, to say the least. I think we all saw this happening to a certain degree when Trump got elected the second time. Throughout his campaign, one of the core campaign promises was to protect the U.S. worker, was to make others pay, whatever that means, but make others pay, because all the deals that we had were unfair. And one shining number that the president was using to communicate that was the deficit. The deficit is the difference between how much we buy from other countries, we being the US, how much the US buys from other countries, against how much other countries buy from the US. And it was very lopsided with most countries in the world. We buy much more in the US than other countries buy from us. And that was perceived by this administration as an unfair outcome of policies from the past. So when Trump first became president, he increased tariffs quite a bit. People thought when Biden becomes president, which is the Democrat administration, they're going to retreat on some of those tariffs because maybe this is a partisan thing. I don't know. But at the time, I remember when Trump was putting on the tariffs, there were cries of this is going to lead to inflation. This is a tax, all partially true things, but it didn't really pan out that way.
So, Alex, in your opinion, has Trump achieved what he set out to achieve?
Well, it's a good question. Let's first define what success looks like for him and for this administration. So first, DeSantis has said publicly that they want to raise $300 to $600 billion per year off tariffs. So that was one objective. They're run rating over 300. So I would say that there's some success in that part. The other thing that they wanted to achieve was make sure that this doesn't increase inflation in the US. We're very sensitive to price increases in the US. And it's hard to say. Really, it's hard to say. Creeped up just a little bit in certain categories, maybe 1%. So nothing alarming, which is why the administration has felt the confidence to keep pushing and to actually use tariffs as a cudgel on certain countries for political reasons. You know, maybe recently you heard that India, which is buying Russian oil, which is some other issues that the U.S. has with India, they just implemented an incremental 25% tariff. So now their total is 50%. That's very, very high. And it's hard to know exactly how that's going to land in 3 months, 6 months. Some economists are predicting inflation 2-3%, which is tolerable, but some are predicting even higher. And this is an incredible experiment that we're running in the US. I'm sure it's going to be studied in years to come on whether or not something like this, literally a 5 times increase in tariff revenue for a country, how that influences inflation in the medium term. So that's still hard to say if he's reached that objective of keeping inflation tamed. Let's see what happens there. The deficit has moved down. One of the components of the deals is that he's negotiated essentially zero tariffs on U.S. goods across a whole spectrum of things. So that eventually is going to make its way into a decreased deficit, which was another major objective for the administration. And then there's other things that are long-term things that really, we haven't really seen it yet. This administration has warned that pharmaceuticals are going to get higher tariffs, that renewable energy equipment, those types of things are going to get higher tariffs. So I don't think we've really seen the full phase of that part of the tariff war happen just yet. So hard to say right now. This is very interesting to see how it all is going to play out, Peter.
You kind of preempted a little bit my next question, which I was going to ask. Who is always going to be most affected by these tariffs? Any particular industry sectors or product groups that are worse hit than others?
Well, let's break it down. There's one other big component here to everything that's been going on, and it's the removal of the de minimis. And that's actually near and dear to my heart because that directly impacts e-commerce. So let's weave that into the story here. So let's start with American e-commerce merchants. That's my company, Passport. We work with US-based, UK-based e-commerce merchants. I would say 75% of the merchants that we work with, and your typical Shopify or Amazon store, they manufacture outside of the home market. So for US brand, 75% manufacture outside of the US. UK, same thing, maybe even higher in the UK. Where do they buy from? Well, they manufacture in China, in Vietnam, in Mexico. Those are the top countries that we trade with. The price that you pay for the manufactured good went up at least 10%. And in some cases, like in the example that I gave, 50%. Maybe temporarily, but a big portion of this, I would say, is a permanent part of the cost structure now. Where does that price increase go? Well, it can go as a decrease in your margin. So that's, the shareholders of the business, less bonuses, less money to pay, wages, all of that kind of stuff. The other big component is, fine, a US-based business is just going to pass the cost along. They could increase prices. Okay, so who's the loser there? Well, the consumer is the loser in that particular case, right? The only winner is the U.S. government, which has a high U.S. deficit, and they need to pay it down. We have a lot of money that we owe, and we need new income generating paths, and this is one. Collecting revenue from importers and exporters. They're a winner, and then the last component to all this, of course, is the manufacturer in China or the manufacturer in India. They're also a big loser because the U.S. business, part of how they're approaching this tariff is they're going to them and they're negotiating the prices down. They're saying, hey, you got to help me pay for this. We've got to split this tariff cost, find a way to lower costs, so forth and so on. So that's another margin compression for the foreign manufacturer.
Well, I'm impressed with you so far, Alex, because you've anticipated my next question, which is who are the winners and who are the likely losers in all of this. You've explained that very clearly. So, what in real terms, what are the implications for these e-commerce businesses? Are we seeing reduced levels of business in terms of volumes there?
Well, let's take one extreme example. This actually is a retaliatory tariff that Canada put on the U.S. for U.S.-made goods of 25%. Okay, so this covered everything from cosmetics to apparel. So if you're selling cosmetics that cost 100 Canadian dollars, let's say, and then all of a sudden the Canadian government imposes a 25% surtax on US made goods, and now that order goes from 100 to 125. I mean, that's a completely different type of economic transaction. 25% more expensive. It's very, very expensive. And naturally, the sales are going to go down. Supply and demand 101. And that's happening. That's an extreme example. The more typical example is the manufacturer's cost. The manufacturing cost goes up by 25, 30%. And then it's an open question for a brand whether or not they want to eat it in margin or they want to pass it along in costs. We're seeing everything. We're seeing everything across the board, Peter. So some are eating everything. Okay, they had really great margins. They're kind of a monopolist in the market, and they want to keep their monopolist pricing power, and they don't want to let anybody in, and they're going to just eat this, and it's going to take a hit on their margin. And they were already very profitable. Now they're just a little bit less profitable. Okay, so that's one end of the extreme. There's another end of the extreme where a brand sells something relatively commoditized. Their margins were already razor thin, and there's no place in the margin for them to eat it. So they have to increase price in lockstep with how much their prices increased. Okay, that's the other end of the extreme. They have no negotiating leverage with suppliers, and they have no negotiating leverage with consumers. That margin has to go somewhere. That extra, but tariff is a type of cost. It has to go somewhere. So we're seeing that as well.
Yeah, it's a fixed cost. So for anybody tuning in, this all sounds terrible news, but the hope is that in the title of this episode, we've got a founder's take on thriving during global disruption. So let's get on to thriving, Alex, for goodness sake. How do you help businesses to thrive in these turbulent times? I mean, let's be honest, we're talking about supply chain logistics here. These businesses tend to thrive when everything's stable, when they're in control of all the elements of their processes. How do you help them thrive when that's not the case?
Yeah, well, I got to say, the US is a very small percentage of the total population of the world. So this high tariff regime that the US is putting on a very big, important market. Now, I'm not downplaying it. It's a very wealthy market. It's a very important market. It's the biggest buyer in the world. However, it's still a small percentage of the total purchasing power of the entire world. And the world is getting wealthier, and the world is your oyster. And there's a whole lot of opportunity for brands to take this as their push. Everybody needs a little bit of push sometimes, to take that push into other markets. And some brands that are based outside of relatively big markets like UK and the US, they've already mastered it. So like a brand that's based in New Zealand, whenever we come across brands that are based in New Zealand, you know what percentage of their sales is their home market in New Zealand? It's like 2%, Yeah. Maybe Australia is like 10%, US is 25%, UK is 10%. You see, they've figured out a way to grow beyond their market. But when a brand is based in US, they feel like they just need to get good at this market. But because of the high tariff regime, because of the high competitiveness, because of this increased, complexity to import, I would say, even at this point, we still have to talk about the de minimis, Peter. Let's not forget about that one. That's also like an extra complication for everything. Brands have, based in the US and UK, largely ignored the huge opportunity abroad. And this is their opportunity to make a name for themselves in other markets. And the thriving part of this is they get to diversify their revenue base. So even putting aside this whole tariff thing, whenever the US went into a recession or there's some other kind of regulatory changes on a product that you sell into the market, it's disruptive. And when 100% of your sales are in one single market, it's really, really disruptive. So it's nice to make the US only 10, 15% of your sales and make the world the other 85%. It's just a healthier, stronger business to be diversified. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say, of course. So that's the big opportunity here. It's to find your tribe, your so-called tribe for your brand outside of the US. Why not?
So what is the impact of the ending of the de minimis? I mean, we're recording here on the first few days of September, and it's only just come into effect, the removal of it. And how can merchants prepare for this new normal?
Let's define what de minimis is. So the US did not charge duties or tariffs on any product or any order that was shipped into the US as long as it was valued under $800. Back in May, the president signed an executive order to remove that designation, that duty de minimis, for products that are made in China. So even if there's a $1 product that gets shipped from China into US, that $1 product, you owe, whatever it is, 25% tariffs on that $1 product, you owe 25 cents. However, there was still a duty de minimis for every other country in the world, literally every other country in the world. And those of us in the industry saw the writing on the wall because it's a little bit odd, to only have it on China. Let's start with that. But really also created a perverse incentive for what's called transshipment, where you ship it from China to Vietnam and then to the US, or it created an incentive to, again, just move, like have a Chinese factory basically set up in another country, and now suddenly you're back into the loophole. So the administration removed the duty de minimis for everything that's not made in China for the rest of the world. It literally went into effect on August 29th. So just happened a couple of days ago as of this recording. And a huge portion of e-commerce, I want to say about 15% of all of e-commerce took advantage, rightfully so, legal advantage. They were doing nothing wrong, but took advantage of what one might call a loophole to avoid paying duties on these cross-border e-commerce shipments. Two of the biggest companies that did that, of course, was Temu and Shein, but there's a whole bunch of other ones as well. And they had a choice. They could either continue to ship from China or from other countries into the US and just pay duties, or they can import those goods into the US. Since there's no more advantage, might as well import into the US and distribute those goods locally. We call that local fulfillment at Passport. And it's shaking out right now. We'll see exactly how it happens. But Temu and Shein essentially brought 80 to 90% of their inventory into the US, and they're basically distributing it locally in the US. So while they did take a hit and their cost structure did go up, because their cost structure was so cheap. So, one of those items, like one of those rugs, even a rug, one of those things that they sell is literally only like $2 for them to make. So they're paying, fine, it's a high duty, 25%, but on such a low number. So they're paying a duty of, 50 cents, $1, $2 here or there. And of course, it will increase costs, but the prices were so low that it might not really move the needle too much. But it is really going to impact, I would say, more branded e-commerce, where things are a little bit more expensive, where a company might manufacture in Italy, a leather handbag or something like that, and it'll cost $40 the cost of goods sold will be $40. And now you have to pay 25% on that $40. Now we're really talking, now it's multiple dollars, sometimes in the tens of dollars of duties per item that a brand has to pay.
So say for example, I'm an e-commerce merchant or an importer, an exporter. I'm casting around for help here. I need help growing my business. I need help sustaining my business that at the levels where it currently is. I've had a little look around. I've done a bit of Googling, I'm pretty good at that sort of thing. And I've landed on your website, which I have to say is full of advice at passportglobal.com. Very, very good information on there. So I now start to engage with you. How do you come and help me? What's our interface, and what are the areas where you can lead me?
Yeah. Peter, wait till you hear about ChatGPT. That one, the search on that one gets really incredible. We're actually very proud of the amount of incredible content we've built up. And sometimes I'm looking for a question, and ChatGPT will reference back something that we wrote, and I didn't even realize that we ourselves wrote an article about it, and I just had to look internally. And ChatGPT finds it for me. So it's really, really interesting. So I appreciate you saying that. So we engage with brands on two things, on two dimensions. One is cross-border e-commerce. Okay. Today we ship outbound to rest of world from US and from the UK, and we're launching Canada really soon. We actually used to do Canada, but it's really interesting because the de minimis went away. We had to rewire our logistics and now ship Canada outbound from Canada, because we used to drive our Canadian parcels into the US and consolidate it with our US volume. It was actually the most efficient, cheapest way of doing it. And now we're rewiring it and we have to do Canada outbound. So anyway, so we have that business, right? And then we have another business, which is basically enabling brands. This is meant for relatively big brands that do total, call it 25 million of revenue and up. We help those brands set up local operations in country. So if we're talking about a UK brand, that means every country other than the UK. So we'll help them set up local operations in the US, in EU, and we help across the board for that. Really, one of our innovative services is essentially entity as a service. So we act as a brand's importer of record and merchant of record, so that the brand doesn't need to create any registrations locally. Okay, that really helps, because who wants to have to deal with like local HMRC or local IRS? It's just a headache, right? So we do that for brands. We do their logistics management, because when brands they're used to distributing locally in UK. If you're a UK brand, of course, that's their expertise. But again, they don't know who the best players are in the fulfillment space in the US or in EU. They don't buy a lot of freight from, say, China into the US. So that's where we come in, and we have a lot of group buying market power there. And we're able to get costs really, really low and get the cost structure really low for brands that engage with us. And then the last thing that we do, and we do this both for cross-border and for in-country, is we'll go into your website, be it Shopify or Woo or what have you, and we'll localize it. That means local currencies, local pricing, local treatment of duties and taxes, all of those types of things that help drive conversion rate for brands.
So do you have physical infrastructure in these territories, or are you acting through agents? How is it actually set up?
Yeah, it's a good question. We do. So we have 3 warehouses in the US. One is by LAX, one is by Chicago Airport, ORD, and one is by Newark Airport, EWR. And that's where we consolidate volume in those 3 markets. Then we sort by country, and then it becomes agents that help us transport goods across the border. And then we have a network of last mile carriers that we work with in each market that distribute it.
Now, I've worked in language and I know what language localization is. What does localization look like in the logistics space?
Well, it's like this. If you were going on vacation into EU, into Netherlands, let's say, and you went on a website and that website looked like it had, your local pickup method, your PUDO, or it was like a locker method, or it was a local courier that you work with, or it communicated something about duties and taxes being prepaid or not. Whatever that local thing that you would see, you want to be able to help a UK merchant replicate that experience for all the major markets. Look, it doesn't matter. You're not going to do it for Zimbabwe. It's a tiny market for you. There's no reason to, stress out about that one, but you should make it look like a localized experience for an American consumer if you're a UK brand. You don't want to distract a US consumer where somebody's looking at it and going, wait, that's weird. Why does it say .co.uk? I'm used to shopping on .com, right? Or it, says something like slacks. We say pants in the US. So like little words, like little things like that, or the way transit time is communicated in the US. You have your bank holidays in UK. We have different holidays in the US. You need to be consistent. You need to be consistent with how a US consumer is going to see it. And you want to have that experience across the board, from how somebody picks something up to how long something gets delivered in the US. You just want to basically replicate that experience. No reason to get cute. It's just all about making it not distracting for the consumer.
That's interesting, really interesting. And that's way beyond sort of just general everyday language. For example, I live on mainland Europe, and where I live, they quote, if you're going from point A to point B, they talk in kilometers, and I say, I'm about an hour away. And they say, yeah, but how far is that? I say, about an hour. And they say, yeah, but how many kilometers? So I can see how it's very easy to get tongue-tied and a little bit tied up with, what we believe to be the right way to express things. So that's a really valuable service. I can see that. So what other services can Passport Global provide, Alex?
So we provide the cross-border shipping service. We have our own logistics service. We provide the importer of record, the merchant of record, and in some cases, it's called seller of record, where we're not in the payment flow. We provide those services so a brand never needs to register for any fiscal compliance reasons in a country. And we do the regulatory compliance. That's another really key piece of the puzzle here. For cross-border, it's a little bit less important because local governments are a little bit more lax about cross-border shipments. But as soon as you want to carry something locally on a shelf, as soon as you want to import something as freight and distribute it locally, that's when all the local rules and regulations really kick in. And you're subject to, say, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, purview here in the US. And we help navigate that. We have consultants and advisors who basically we quarterback that process and make sure that every brand that we work with is in full compliance of all the local rules and regulations. And then, of course, the front end UI, we make sure that your experience is 100% localized.
So what's the really tricky stuff? Is it you getting involved with, pharmaceuticals, food, fresh food, tobacco, flammable materials, chemicals? Is it all of that?
We try to avoid pretty much everything that you just mentioned. I would say the advanced logistics for us, and maybe to your previous question about what else we do this really creative thing called duty drawback. I actually think a lot of your listeners would be interested in this service. So in some cases, you just have to pay duties. Yeah, of course, you're going to have to pay duties. And in some cases, you're going to re-export that good. So a UK brand may want to import into the US, pay US duties, and then ship from US to Canada because Canada is close by versus from UK to Canada. But it's going to be a tough math question for them because, do I want to pay the US duties and then ship to Canada, which is going to be faster and cheaper? Or do I want to avoid the US duties, ship straight to UK and ship from UK to Canada? It's going to be more expensive to ship from UK to Canada and slower, but at least I avoid the high US duties, So it's an open question how you want to handle that, but we make it a little bit easier for brands because we can get them a refund, a duty drawback on the goods that they ship from US to Canada. That's re-exportation, and the US government encourages brands to put all their inventory in the US and then ship from US outbound. And one of the ways they encourage it is by giving brands a refund on the duties that they paid when they imported it, as long as they re-export that good. So that's one of the creative solutions we've brought to market recently in light of all this tariff morass.
Alex, during the first half of this podcast, you painted a very powerful global picture of where we are today. I want you to use your crystal ball now, which I'm sure you've got. It's probably just off camera. It's probably just under your desk, and have a little go at telling me what do you think the future of international trade looks like over the, maybe, should we say, short to medium term?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's start with this. Tariffs are here to stay. There's some copium going around that says when the next administration comes in, they're going to get rid of all these crazy tariffs because the Democrat administration is talking about how this set of tariffs is going to increase prices, and they're true. I mean, it's true to a certain extent. It's true. So surely, when the Democrats regain control of decision making, either through the presidency or what have you, they're going to lower tariffs. Not so fast. That did not happen after Trump increased tariffs the first time during Trump 1, and then Biden became president. He did not decrease tariffs. I don't expect any administration going forward to decrease tariffs quickly. Maybe gradually, a little bit over time, we'll see. But we still have a huge deficit. We still like to spend more than we're collecting as a government. And the tariffs, it's very difficult for the government to get rid of this piece of revenue. So I don't think that the tariffs are going anywhere for a really long time. That's probably the most important thing. I don't think that the de minimis is coming back. Another thing that people think might be coming back. This is another, I would say, across the board, bipartisan, popular endeavor of removing the de minimis. And I don't see it coming back either. What I do see is the market adjusting to the new reality and doing one of two things. Moving over time, more manufacturing in country. And there's a lot of really interesting technology that's being built right now around that, around robotics, around AI, right? So a lot of really interesting things are happening where more and more, especially the more complicated things like you were talking about and more like national security friendly things, like anything related to steel and energy and health and wellness, it's starting to move in country. So same in UK, more and more are starting to look at ways of manufacturing in the UK. Same in the EU. The EU is many countries, so there's a lot of more opportunity for manufacturing specialization there. So I see that happening. And then also moving manufacturing to the lowest tariff countries possible, where it doesn't look like there's any misalignment between the countries from a political standpoint. So this administration is clearly using tariffs for political and national security. That's the stated goal in a lot of these cases. It was to fight fentanyl, all of that. So it's going to be difficult for somebody to justify manufacturing in China, all things being equal. Sometimes you have no choice, but all things being equal, versus a country like Peru, which is a very small country, and it's not going to be on the national stage competing with the US. So that's a safer country, I would say, to manufacture. And you can already see it in the tariffs, and you're going to start to see some manufacturing flow into those countries as well. So that's my crystal ball prediction.
Well, seems like a great place to stop. Alex, there's business out there to be won, and I feel like I'm keeping you away from it, or have kept you away from that prime task for far too long. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a great pleasure talking to you about a topic which has such significant implications for our industry. I'd say thank you for holding our hand and walking us through it in such clear terms. And I've certainly come away here understanding a lot more about the subject than I did before. I also want to say thank you to you, the listener, for joining us today. Wherever you get your podcasts from, please subscribe to Logistics Business Conversations to make sure that the next edition is delivered straight to you as soon as it's released. Until then, it's goodbye from Alex Yancher.
Goodbye. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me.
And it's goodbye from me, Peter MacLeod. Goodbye.